All right, we're going to split up Argentina into two different things. First thing I want to talk about is the economy of Argentina. Again, Argentina, how do we put this? Argentina, okay, South America in particular is a weird thing in the world. Like sometimes we talked in the Cold War about the first world, which is sort of, the democratic, wealthy countries. The second world, which is the Soviet Union, which was not very well off. And then the third world, which is poor. Like, where does South America fit into this? And the answer is it doesn't really fit into that categorization very well. It's not developed like at the level of, say, Europe, but it's also not underdeveloped or even developing. I mean, it's not bad. You almost might call it middle class. If Europe and the U.S. are the rich of the world and the third world is the poor, South America kind of fits into that middle class. Like, we're not rich, we're not poor, we're just kind of in the middle there. And Argentina is probably the best instance of this because a lot of Europeans after the war, World War II, came over to Argentina and really sort of revived that economy quite a bit. And so, man, Argentina it's a weird one in the whole thing. So you might say, okay, so you have this whole sort of country of people that are pretty well off. I mean, they're not rich. We wouldn't put this at U.S. European levels, but they're not bad. They're pretty well off. It's got their economy, lots of resources, and a well-educated workforce. This is exactly what you want. I mean, you don't necessarily need to be the richest country in the world. All right, now, so I just want you to picture essentially, like, I guess you might say you guys relative to the rest of the country, that there's a sense in which we're kind of middle class. We're not the richest in America. We're not the poorest in America. We're kind of middle class. So then 2001 happens, and this horrible recession hits South America. I mean, it is bad. Now, it's really happening across the world, but it really hit South America really hard. And so here's what I want you to picture. I want you to picture your neighborhood back at home. And then I want you to picture that 50% of the people in your neighborhood are now living in poverty. Because that's essentially what happens. You have essentially this middle-class country. I know I'm overblowing it a little bit. But now all of a sudden, it now fits into that category of the poor. More than 50% of the people are now living in poverty. People that would have never have really experienced poverty in this way before. It's just such a horrible thing. So what do people do? Obviously, it's one thing if you start poor and stay poor. But when you are starting not poor and you become poor, you get more pissed off. And that leads to unrest. So people took to the streets. The government said, I hear you guys, we're just not going to pay back our loans. So we owed loans to the IMF, we owed loans to the United States, we owed loans to European countries. We're just not going to pay them. We can't afford to pay them. We need all this money to keep our economy going. And what happens is the currency is devalued. What that essentially means is the value of the Argentinian, probably peso, I actually don't, maybe it's the Argentinian dollar, I don't really know. The value of it goes down internationally. So now your economy is kind of in free fall. So now you're not spending this money on paying off the loans, but the money you have is actually worth less than it was before. And that makes things even worse. And there's protests and the government is eventually thrown out. Like, things are so bad economically that the government's thrown out. So now, how do you come back from this? 2003, the Argentina gets a new loan from the IMF. Remember the IMF, International Monetary Fund? That is the international organization that when you have an emergency, this is not just a loan, this is like an emergency loan. Like, if we don't give you guys this money, your economy will literally collapse, which will send South America into collapse, which will send the rest of the countries into collapse. So to prevent global economic collapse, take this money. They take a loan from the IMF. And what that does, they take that money, and then that sort of settles things down. So now people from outside Argentina are more willing to invest back into Argentina, foreign direct investment. And then Argentina also restructures the debt. They call up like the United States and says, look, we're not going to be able to pay all your money back, but we'll give you 40 cents for every dollar we borrowed. Take it or leave it. And the United States says, well, I'm not happy with that, but it's better than having Argentina collapse and bringing us down with it. So, okay, we'll take 40 cents on the dollar, kind of chills things out a little bit. But this ends up ignoring some serious social problems. And this is what we call conditionality, where essentially you get the loan from the IMF, but the IMF says, here's the money, but you have to spend it on this, this, and this. And these people in the streets are saying, that's not where I think you should spend the money. We need health care. We need education. We have no money. We need you to take that money and spend it on us. And the conditions of getting the loan is you can't do that. And so that creates more problems in there. And it's just, Argentina does eventually, their economy does sort of rebound from this, but ever since that moment, it bounces back into that again every once in a while, and protests and all that kind of stuff. In fact, this default on the 2001 debts is still in U.S. courts right now. The U.S. sort of said, yeah, we'll accept this, but then a bunch of other banks and things said, no, we don't accept this, and so the courts are still trying to figure this out. So Argentina's economy looks okay, but it's what we call unstable, meaning it can dip very quickly and go back up and then dip very quickly, and that's a tough way to live, not knowing if things are going to collapse every 5 seconds. All right, so I want you to watch this next video. It's on this thing called